The night had a familiar weight to it, the kind that settled into your chest and made everything feel slightly slower. I was alone in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling when my phone buzzed against the wooden table. It was late, the streetlights painted thin gold lines through the blinds. I had not been expecting a call. The screen woke up to a single notification, one new voicemail. My thumb hovered over the play button long enough for the silence to gather around me. The name on the top said, Mom. Seeing it made something cold and heavy slither through my stomach. We hadn't spoken in months. Our last conversation had been sharp and small, a quick exchange that ended with the door left ajar and the key turned into silence. I pressed play. There was a soft breath, a pause, the subtle sound of someone trying to steady themselves before words came out. You are not family anymore. Don't come back. We're moving on without you. Her voice was calm, flat, almost rehearsed. The air in my room seemed to leak out. For a moment I forgot how to breathe. The phone slid from my fingers and landed with a quiet thud on the carpet. I stayed still, as if making any movement would break the world into smaller pieces. I replayed the message 3 times. Each repetition made the words sharper, like an incision learning its precise pattern. I tried to remember the last time she had said anything like that directly to me. There was nothing, just the memory of her hands folding laundry, the smell of tea, the way she would sit on the kitchen steps and stare at a point beyond the house as if she could see another life there. I did not cry immediately. I sat in that heavy silence and listened to the echo of her voice until dawn crept through the blinds and painted thin, honest lines on the floorboards. My childhood had always been threaded with small, stubborn acts of survival. My father left when I was young. The details of that leaving were hazy to me, like a photograph left too close to the sun. I remember the day he packed, a brief, rigid collection of clothing, an embrace that felt like a transaction, a slammed door that tried to explain everything it intended to be. After that, my mother became both fortress and weather. She worked 2 jobs for years, swallowed exhaustion, and still somehow carved out mornings to make warm bread or fold my coat. She did not say, I love you, often, but she taught me to tie my shoes, to wash dishes until they were quiet, to keep my head down and my hands working. As I grew, the world beyond our small apartment whispered its promises. I wanted to leave, to breathe in a different air, to be myself without the shadow of pity or the constant hum of survival. I moved to another city with a cheap suitcase and ambitious ideas about how close you could get to happiness if you kept walking. Distance is a strange thing. It rearranges voices. It compresses affection into shorter calls, fewer visits, and messages that accumulate dust. At first, we called once a week. Then once a month. Then seasons passed between our conversations. My mother adjusted the way she loved from a hands-on persistence to sporadic, cautious concern. She said less of what she used to say. I assumed the silence would tend to each of us as we learned to live separate lives. I told myself that moving away was a necessary fracture, growth, I said to myself. But every growth can be a wound. The distance that protects also creates a space where misunderstanding can flourish. I had not anticipated anger to calcify on our lines like salt. And then the voicemail, that sharp, simple declaration that cut like a sideswipe, you are not family anymore. It forced me to reopen the ledger of our past and measure whether what I had taken for love had instead been a complex, exhausted facade made to keep us breathing. That night, as I sifted through old photographs and messages, I realized how much of our communication had been practical, bills, logistics, a recipe here and there, but not the gentle confessions I had been saving for some later, safer time. I had wanted more words from her. She had made a choice I could not see. Or perhaps she had made no choice at all. 3 days passed in a kind of muted fog. I went to work mechanically, ate meals that tasted like paper, and replayed the voicemail until the cadence of her voice became a background track to everything I did. Friends asked if I was okay. I lied. On the 3rd night, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. The message was simple, please call me. The woman on the line said her name was Layla and that she lived next door to my mother. Her voice was cautious, like someone walking along the edge of a thin ice sheet. She told me that what I had heard in the voicemail hadn't been entirely of my mother's making. She was forced to say it, Layla whispered. The words arrived with their own gravity. I asked, in the stilted way of someone trying to pull a thread, forced how. There was a pause. I don't know all of it, she said. But she wasn't herself. Someone was with her when she called. I heard voices. I'm scared. I drove back the next morning. The city I returned to felt smaller and older, like a set on a stage where people came to play out the roles of their past. My hands were clenched around the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The street where I grew up had not forgotten us, but it was different. Shops had new signs and gardens had grown where garages used to be. When I reached the house, the front door was unlocked. The place looked abandoned, not in the sense that it had been left in haste, but like someone had drawn a white sheet over every surface and left the faces blank. There were no photographs on the walls, no cups on the counter, no trace of a life lived out loud. It was as if someone had edited our story down to the smallest, meanest elements. The neighbor who answered the door was Layla. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She looked at me with an intensity that suggested she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "They made her leave," she said almost before I could ask. "Who?" I breathed. She swallowed. "I don't know their names. But there were people coming and going. People who did not belong here. They changed things. They told her to do things." "You mean they forced her to say that voicemail?" I asked. Layla nodded. "I'm sorry. She was afraid you would leave, but she thought it was safer if you stayed away. They told her that if you came back, you would be in more danger." Every muscle in my body reacted to that sentence. The world tilted sideways, and a deep, animal part of me, dormant for years, woke. "How long?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. "But it's been months." There were quiet days and then some days with visitors. We all walked on eggshells. I walked the empty rooms again, touching countertops, opening cabinets, looking for anything that might be left behind. On the shelf over the sink, there was a single envelope yellowed from age. My name was written on the front in my mother's looping hand. My hands trembled as I tore it open. A small note was folded inside, the edges damp where someone had clutched it. In her handwriting were these words: "If you ever find this, it means I couldn't tell you the truth out loud. I never stopped loving you. Look where the tree hides the light." I walked into the backyard. The old oak tree where I had once buried a tin box of Matchbox cars stood like a patient sentinel. I pushed at the ground near its roots with my hands until the soil gave way. My fingers hit something cold and metallic. I dug out a small rusted box. Inside was a USB flash drive wrapped in a napkin and another note. The napkin smelled faintly of lemon and dust. The second note read, "You were never abandoned. You were protected." I held the tiny drive like a relic and felt, suddenly, how many layers of reality had been placed between us. Back in my apartment, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop with hands that refused to be still. The folder that appeared on the desktop was titled simply, "For My Son." Inside were files, a single video, a text file, and several short audio clips. I clicked the video first. My mother's face filled the screen. She sat in a dimly lit room, the kind of room that holds its memories in the furniture and in the tired lines of someone's face. She looked older than she had in any photograph I kept, but when she saw me in the camera, it was as if she had been waiting to say these things for years. "If you're watching this," she began, her voice cracking like dried leaves, "it means I couldn't tell you everything the normal way. I don't have the luxury of time, but I have to leave you something that will make sense later." She told a story in short bursts, fragments that made a map of something darker than I had imagined. There were people, she said, who moved through our lives like shadows, not interested in relationships or community, but in something else: access, proximity, leverage. They wanted something I had, she said. At first I did not understand what she meant. "They saw you as something to use," she whispered. "They said if you stayed near me you'd be easy to control." I didn't know how to stop them at first. I thought I could bargain, but they gradually took more and more space, options, until staying near you was too dangerous. She looked directly at the camera. "I made them believe I hated you. I said things I did not mean. I created distance because if I pulled you closer, they would come with you. They were watching everyone. I learned to give them what they wanted so they would leave you alone." She paused as if the words cost something to say. "Please know this. I did it to protect you. Every cold thing I ever said was a shield." The voicemail was one of those shields. I watched the video twice more, thrice, each time the pieces of the puzzle slotting together with a chime that echoed in my ribs. There was an audio clip where I could hear what sounded like two male voices in the background discussing schedules, inventory, and a reference to keeping things intact. It was like overhearing a plan that had never allowed for human feelings. The text file contained coordinates and a date. Beneath it, in shaky handwriting, there was a line: "If things go wrong, go to the lake." The lake. A place of childhood summers and the one place where my mother had once laughed so freely I'd thought she would break with joy. The coordinates pointed to an old cottage on the shore, one she had kept secret from anyone but me. I drove there as if pulled by an invisible string. The cottage was small and sleeping under a winter of dust. The door was ajar. Inside, light shifted across a quilt like a sleeping animal's breath. In the corner, as if it were expecting me, sat my mother. She looked much older up close. Her fingers were thin and inked with the ghost of calluses. Her face, for all its weariness, held the same stubborn set I had known as a child. When she saw me, something unclenched in her face and then closed again, not from pain but from relief. We did not speak for a while. We walked the small rooms like two people relearning how to share air. Her explanations came in pieces, threaded with shame and apology that she seemed to think I deserved because she had made me believe she abandoned me. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I never wanted you to hate me, but I needed you away. It was the only way." I felt so many contradictory things at once: anger, entire years of hurt, and the surprising, immediate clarity that had always lived beneath it, her love. The video had been a confession and a map both. She had chosen to become cold in the world's eyes so I could be warm somewhere else. She told me about the men who had come to the house, polite in one light, menacing in another. They asked questions, left messages, and they watched who came and went. She had learned to speak for them sometimes, to avoid suspicion. She had been good at pretending. It was something she hid behind like armor. That voicemail, she said, was a performance. It was meant to convince them that you were not worth their attention. What were they after? I asked. She looked at me, and for the first time, the fierce, original person I loved, the woman who had built our fragile life, was there in the eyes. "Control," she said. They wanted control. They wanted to use family ties as currency. They wanted someone pliable. They were trying to build leverage, not love. I took it on myself to become what they expected so you would become what I hoped, free. The cottage felt like a harbor. Outside, the lake breathed, wind making small waves that looked like silver threads. For a long while we sat on the porch and listened to the water and exchanged the kind of silence that means two people have said things they needed to say without using sound. The first time I hugged my mother after the cottage, it felt like learning the rhythm of an old song. The embrace was awkward at first. Years of distance and carefully cultivated distance made muscles unfamiliar, but when it settled, it found the place they both fit. She cried with a softness I had not heard in years. The kind of crying that roams through the cartilage of your chest and rearranges the geometry of sorrow into something that can be carried. She had reasons and regrets, and she told them to me in the plainest language she could find. That she had chosen fear over confrontation because she believed it was the only way to keep me safe. We spoke for hours. She gave me names she had recorded, fragments of conversations, the way they had arrived at our door asking for favors that had nothing to do with kindness. She showed me receipts and notes that painted the picture of how small demands became large manipulations. It was mundane and monstrous at once. I listened and then I asked, with a steadiness I had not known I possessed, "Why didn't you tell me anything? Why did you let me think I was abandoned?" She closed her eyes and the years moved over her face like curtains. "Because if I had told you, they would have come after you directly. I couldn't risk it. I thought when you were angry and distant, you would be safe on your own, away from their attention. I was trying to be your shadow, not your rescuer. At some point, we had to decide what to do next." The men who had watched our house were no longer an abstract threat. They had names and faces, patterns. Layla had offered to help. A few neighbors had quietly given accounts of strange deliveries, unintentional visitors, and the way men who claimed to be business partners would sit in the night and whisper. We made a plan that was deliberately ordinary: change routines, file reports, talk to someone with authority. It felt absurd and necessary. I reported the voicemail and the recordings. I took the audio files to authorities. We were careful. We did not act like people at the end of their tether. We acted like people who had been wronged and were now taking back small pieces of their life. The legal work was slow and antiseptic and occasionally infuriating, but it also served as a kind of ritual that turned terror into language. Each paper signed, each person interviewed, each detail logged was a reclamation. We were no longer simply hiding. We were naming. After a while, the men stopped coming. Maybe it was because their attention could no longer gain traction. Maybe it was because the act of naming made me inevitable, and inevitability is difficult for manipulators to profit from. Whatever the reason, the pressure eased. Time is strange. It is a patient recorder of the small ways we mend. It does not rush, it arranges. Over months, our conversations stretched longer and the tension between us loosened. Sometimes we would sit in silence with cups of tea, sometimes we would laugh at a memory of a child's past clumsiness. We began the slow work of stitching our lives back together, knowing now how fragile the seams had been and how fiercely we wanted them to hold. When I finally posted the story online, my recounting of the voicemail, the evidence, the drive, and the eventual reunion, I was prepared for nothing. I shared because I wanted someone else to know that what looks like abandonment might sometimes be protection, because sometimes pain wears a costume to hide a heart. The response was not all sympathy, there were accusations and skepticism. But there were also messages from people who had felt the sharpness of a similar voice and found themselves bewildered. Some wrote that the story helped them look again at a goodbye they had taken for granted. My mother and I continued to heal in small, patient increments. The wounds did not vanish overnight. There were nights the memory of that voicemail still made my chest contract, nights when she would awake with a start and whisper my name. But those nights grew less frequent. On an ordinary afternoon, we drove out to the lake with a thermos of tea and a bag of stale cookies. We walked the shore and kicked at pebbles until the sun went low and made the water a sheet of molten copper. There was a softness to our steps that had not been there before, and sometimes, without warning, she would reach for my hand. I would squeeze back. Sometimes, when I am alone, I remember that message the way one remembers a storm, the sound and the fury, the way the sky looked afterward, and the slow, stubborn mowing of life as it returns. I no longer play that voicemail on repeat. I keep it stored away like a map that pointed me to something necessary. I listen instead to the small things, the clink of a spoon in a cup, the hum of the refrigerator, the way her breath sounds when she laughs. Those are the sounds that have taught me what is true. Occasionally, I think about the people who thought they could use us as leverage. I feel a small surge of gratitude that my mother had the courage to make such a lonely, painful choice. It was a violence to her reputation and to our relationship, but it was also an act of guardianship. She traded the warmth of our daily life for a shield she could color with cruelty, all to keep some darker force from touching me. If there is a lesson here, it is not a neat one. People are messy. Love is messy. Sacrifice often looks like cruelty from the outside. To survive the unspeakable, we sometimes have to accept the unsightly, to wear a cloak that will deflect the worst of the world. That does not make the pain lighter. It does not erase the nights of confusion or the years of questioning. But it does make possible a morning where the water looks like glass and a pair of hands can find another pair and hold on. Sometimes, when I pass a voicemail in my phone, I notice her name and wonder if I should listen again. I rarely do. The past is useful in directions it need not be repeated. The voicemail is a relic that taught me how to look. It guided me to a box and to a lake and to the woman who loved me enough to be cruel for a while so that I might live with a future. In the end, we are learning how to be family again, with honesty and the careful, stubborn work that loving someone truly requires. We are learning how to sit together through silence until neither of us feels the need to perform our pain into protection. And sometimes, under the old oak tree, when the light tilts just right through the leaves, we sit and remember that the greatest survival sometimes comes disguised as a farewell. If you want, I can now provide this text split into audio-friendly timestamped segments for easy recording. Produce a clean word count and an estimate of exact audio duration at different speaking rates. Create a ready-to-use YouTube title, description, and tags for this story. Which of those would you like next?